We will be discussing today Dr. B R Ambedkar's political thinking. Dr. Ambedkar is known to all of us as the father of the Indian Constitution. He was the chairman of the drafting committee in the Constituent Assembly, which drafted the Indian Constitution, which came into force on January 26, 1950. In fact, this task earned him the title, the father of the Indian Constitution. But Dr. Ambedkar was more than this. His activities were not confined to this aspect only. He was a jurist, an academic, a prolific writer, and a lifelong crusader against caste oppression and caste injustices. He was a champion of social justice. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar's political thinking constituted one of the most important and significant aspects of the political thinking of modern India for a particularly specific reason. Like most of the Indian leaders of the colonial period, Dr. Ambedkar's crusade was not just against foreign rule, but it was also against caste oppression. He believed that just freedom from the foreign rule is not enough. It is freedom of the individual that is of crucial importance. In order to understand Dr. B R Ambedkar's political thinking, it would be convenient if we discuss this into two lectures. In this lecture, we will be discussing two aspects. One is the life, work, and achievements of Dr. B R Ambedkar. That is, a biography of Ambedkar will be presented. And in the second aspect, the crusades against caste oppression, his political movements will be discussed. One has to understand that these aspects are intertwined. As he himself belonged to an untouchable community, he experienced the oppression of the lower castes by the upper castes. That is why he conducted certain political protests that were not just against foreign rule, but were against the upper castes. And at the same time, these two provoked him to write several articles in journals and in several books, and these ultimately formulate his features of the political thinking that we will be discussing in the next lecture. Let us begin with the life, work, and achievements of Dr. B R Ambedkar. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar was born in 1891 at the military cantonment area called Mau in the central provinces, which is now the Madhya Pradesh. However, he had a Maratha background and they belonged to the Ambavade area of the Ratnagiri district of Maharashtra. He belonged to the Mahar community, which is regarded as an untouchable community. Now, two aspects here should be mentioned. One is an interesting story about how his surname became Ambedkar. He was actually Ambavadekar till his high school days. When he joined the high school, one of his teachers, Mahadev Ambedkar, who was, however, a Brahmin, he liked this little boy very much and he changed his surname from Ambavadekar to Ambedkar and he became Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar. Ramji was the name of his father who used the surname Sakpal, and they in fact belonged to the Mahar community, and a little bit of untouchability here should be mentioned in order to understand how he experienced the caste oppression, particularly during his school days. Now, we have found in the ancient Hindu scriptures and in the Vedic tradition, in the Shastra tradition, and in the Smriti tradition, the system called Chaturvarna, where 4 castes were mentioned: the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras. Now, the first 3 castes were regarded as upper castes, who in fact could wear the sacred thread, and the 4th caste, that is the Shudras, were to serve the upper castes. Now, apart from these 4 castes or the Chaturvarna, gradually there emerged a 5th caste. They were called Panchamas or the Otishudras or the outcasts. Now, they were those who were engaged in removal of the wastes, removal of the animal carcasses, engaging in the leather work, and they were outcasts because they did not belong to this Chaturvarna. Now, it was regarded that they were the polluting factors of the society. So, a touch with them could pollute the other person. So, they had to be shun away from the rest of the society. They could live in the outer rings of the village community, and they did not belong to the caste system of the Hindu tradition. Ambedkar was born into one such community. Now, after completing certain education in his native village, they moved to Bombay in 1897, where he got himself admitted to the Elphinstone School and became the first one from the Mahar community to get into such a school of repute. But before joining that school, he experienced himself certain practices which normally go with the caste system of India. When he was a little boy and was educated in a village school, he found that he could not sit with the other boys in the classroom. He had to sit outside the classroom. He had to take gunny bags from his home on which he used to sit, and he could not drink water with the common source, with the common tap. Someone from the upper caste had to pour water to him from a height. And it was the peon of the school who used to do this work. In fact, when the peon for certain reasons remained absent, Ambedkar could not drink water. Later on, in one of his writings, he referred to this incident as no peon, no water. Now, later on, when he completed his study from the Elphinstone School, in 1907, he passed the matriculation examination in that year. He got himself enrolled in the Elphinstone College and completed his graduation in 1912. Now, in between this time, in 1906, another incident occurred. Following the family tradition and the community tradition, he was married to Ramabai, who was just 9 years old at that time. Now, he completed the college education and with honors in economics and political science. And when he began to work in 1913 in some capacities, his father suddenly died. In the same year, he got a fellowship from the Gaikwad Trust of the Baroda state, and he went to Columbia University in the United States for a master's degree. He did that successfully, again in economics, with anthropology, sociology, these subjects as allied subjects, and there another important incident took place. In the anthropology department, in a seminar, he presented a paper titled Castes in India. Later on, he developed this paper and a very major academic work of Ambedkar called The Annihilation of Caste came out in 1937. After completing his master's from the Columbia University, he went to England and completed the bar examination at the Gray's Inn College at London. In that same year, in 1917, he got himself enrolled in the London School of Economics for a PhD degree, and the title of his dissertation was Indian Rupee. But he had to come back that very year as his fellowship was terminated. In 1917, after coming to India, he started certain odd jobs like tutoring students, opening up consultancy firms. But in all these areas, he faced caste discrimination, and he did not get enough students to teach because no one from the upper caste was interested in sending his children to Ambedkar for the fact that he belonged to an untouchable community. In 1918, he joined as a professor in the Sydenham College of Commerce at Bombay. There again, after completing so much education with acclaim and repute from foreign universities, he again faced caste discrimination when his colleagues did not allow him to drink water from the same jug. In 1918, he faced these things, and we can say that up to this constituted the first part of Ambedkar's life when he was engaged in academic activities, earning degrees and increasing his educational level. From 1920 emerged the second phase in Ambedkar's career. In 1920, he started publishing a weekly journal called Mukh Nayak, or the Silent Hero. In 1921, he successfully defended the case of 3 non-Brahmins who in fact said that it was the Brahmins who were ruining India. Against this very charge, a case was filed, and Ambedkar successfully defended these 3 non-Brahmins. In 1924, he in fact organized a meeting under the Bahishkrit Hitakarini Sabha, which later on became an important organization. From 1929, Ambedkar started the famous temple entry movements. In 1929, it was the Parvati temple, and in 1930, it was the Kalaram temple, where Ambedkar, in fact, with his followers, defied the social norms and entered the temple, or rather tried to enter the temple because they were resisted by the police and the local upper caste people. Now, in between, in 1927, a very important incident occurred, which many recognize as a significant event in the political and social reform of India. In that year, that is in 1927, the Mahad Satyagraha occurred. In July, a 3-day convention at Mahad under Ambedkar's leadership took place, where at the end of the convention, around 10,000 so-called untouchables or Dalits defied the social norm and drank water from the Chavdar lake, which is normally regarded as a lake from where the upper caste people used to drink. In December of the same year, that is in 1927, the second Mahad Satyagraha occurred. In December, Ambedkar, again with his followers, tried to defy the social norm and went ahead with his program of drinking water from the Chavdar lake. They were resisted by the local administration. They could not do that, and instead they did a an incident which is almost unparalleled in the history of India's political and social movement. That is, they publicly burnt copies of Manusmriti because they regarded, and in fact it is true that it is the Manusmriti where the codes of conduct for the different castes of people were mentioned, and it is there, or it is from there, the outcasts or the untouchables were regarded as something who could pollute the other castes by a simple touch. So till 1930, Ambedkar was engaged in these kinds of activities. From 1930 onwards, at least for 3 years, another major incident took place in the life of Ambedkar. Ambedkar, in fact, was the only person who attended all the 3 roundtable conferences that were held in London. He, in fact, represented the depressed classes, which were at that time were regarded as depressed classes. Nowadays, we call it as the scheduled caste. Ambedkar represented this community in all the 3 roundtable conferences. And in 1932, another important incident occurred, that was the Pune pact, when Ambedkar had to sacrifice his demand for the separate electorate for the depressed classes. In fact, Gandhi was very much against this separate electorate clause, and when Ramsay MacDonald was almost ready to announce separate electorate for the depressed classes, Gandhi started his epic fast or fast unto death at the Yeravda jail in Pune. And when all the people became anxious about Gandhi's health, ultimately a pact between Gandhi and Ambedkar was reached at the very Yeravda jail, when Ambedkar sacrificed his demand for the separate electorate. At the same time, Gandhi conceded to the demand for reservation of seats for the depressed classes. So a consensus was reached where the clause for separate electorate for the depressed community was sacrificed, and on the contrary, a demand or a clause for the reservation of seats for the depressed community was accepted. This is a very important incident in the history of India's not only social movement but political movement. So this was in 1932. In 1936, Ambedkar was invited by an organization called Jat Path Tor Mandal to preside over their meeting at Lahore. Ambedkar wrote a paper which he was about to read at that conference, but at the very end, he could not attend that conference because that organization feared that a backlash could happen, and so Ambedkar was denied to attend that conference. But later on, Ambedkar developed that paper, and that was published in 1937 as The Annihilation of Caste. And this paper I was referring to earlier, in fact, this was the development of the presentation that he made during his university days at the Columbia University. So this is a very important writing, not only from the point of view of Indian politics, but from the point of view of academics too. It was an important writing from the anthropological standpoint, from the economic standpoint, and obviously from the sociological perspective. Now, in 1936, Ambedkar formed the Independent Labour Party. This party fought the elections in 1937 for electing representatives to the central legislature. The party won several seats, but from that time, Ambedkar argued that there was no need for further temple entry movements or for that kind of movements with which he associated himself till 1934. From 36-37 onwards, he was more and more engaged with absolutely political movements, that is, forming a political party, contesting elections, and so on. In 1942, Ambedkar founded the Scheduled Caste Confederation, which was actually the transformation of the earlier party called Independent Labour Party. In 1947, in April, Ambedkar married Savita, who became his companion later on till his death. In 1947, when independence dawned on India, Ambedkar became the first law minister of independent India. Later, in December, he became the chairman of the drafting committee which drafted the Indian Constitution for subsequent 2.5 years, which was adopted in 26th of November 1949, and we all know which later came into force in January 26, 1950. In 1950, from 1950, in fact, Ambedkar was engaged in codifying what is later known as the Hindu Marriage Act and the Hindu Code Bill. However, in 1951, Ambedkar realized that there were certain forces, certain conservative forces, certain reactionary forces within the Union Parliament, and these forces were trying to stall the Hindu Code Bill. Against this, Ambedkar resigned from his position of law minister. In 1952, Ambedkar fought the Lok Sabha election as an independent candidate, but he was defeated in that election. However, he was made a member of the Rajya Sabha and he remained to that position till his death later on. In 1956, another major incident in the life of Ambedkar took place. In fact, he was contemplating of converting himself, his wife and his followers into Buddhism. And in 1956, he, along with some of his followers and his wife, were converted to Buddhism. And later, in December that very year, that is in 1956, he died in his sleep. So this is the biography that is needed to understand the political thinking of Ambedkar. The second aspect is to be mentioned here briefly, that is the movements that he conducted. The major movements that he conducted were the Mahad Satyagraha and the Temple Entry Agitation. These movements are important not just for the fact that they were certain social reform movements, but also due to the fact that they in fact constituted his political thinking, which we will be discussing in the next lecture. So a detailed analysis of these movements along with the key features of his political thinking will be taken up in our next presentation.